Hi everyone, my name is Cynthia. Let's talk books. Today I am here to talk about books number 11 through 15 that I read in 2023. All right, I need to work on that intro. So next on my list, book number 11 was Night Wherever We Go by Tracey Rose Payton. I heard about this book, I believe, on TikTok, and it's directly related to reproductive rights, set in a time of slavery, written by a black author, so I knew I needed to read this book. I picked it up, and it is one of those books where you need to go in knowing that this is going to deal with difficult topics. I mean, the setting of slavery automatically will tell you that. But it was incredibly good, just so extremely well done. The book really focuses on this group of 6 women on a plantation. This poor white man, or he's not really poor, but he's a man who strives to be wealthy, and he doesn't have like as much money as he wants to have. So he is able to escape the money he had lost, and has enough to purchase a small plot of land for farming and to purchase 6 slaves. So he purchases 5 female slaves with the goal that these are women, that they can reproduce, that they will basically give birth to more enslaved people for him and add to his wealth without him having to spend a single more penny. So he puts them to work on the plantation, doing all the hard labor. There's no exceptions to this, and then begins the task of making them reproduce. And the way he does this is something that was common in during slavery all over the world, which was to force a male slave to basically go from plantation to plantation for the sole purpose of impregnating enslaved women. He was raping these women, but also, and this is something that is focused on in the book too, or is emphasized, that he's also experiencing rape because he's being forced to do something that he doesn't want to do. In the story, he has a wife and kids, and he just wants to get through this task of being forced to have sex with all these women, because then he can get back to his family. In the meantime, this is incredibly traumatic for the women. I really love the way the author brought in so much history, like that aspect of it. Also the way in which pregnant women's bodies were treated, like they're supposed to be more valuable because of the pregnancy, and yet they were never exempt from any of the violence associated with slavery. Plantation owners, enslavers, felt like they were protecting the pregnancy by sometimes digging a hole in the ground, having the pregnant woman put her belly in the ground, and then they would lash the woman's back, and they thought that that equaled protecting the pregnancy. And so they were thinking of ways to do it that didn't mess with their disciplinary practices, which of course were not going to be valid. Carrying a pregnancy to term for an enslaved woman was actually difficult. Miscarriages were common because of the hard physical labor that women were forced to do. Some women used then abortion as a form of resistance to slavery because they didn't want to give birth to children that they would have no, that they could not form attachments to, that they could not have any control over, because the plantation owner had full control over it, and it was very common for enslavers to sell off children to separate families. And so they knew that if they had a child, that would just lead to a pain. And so for some women, abortion was a form of resistance. For others, though, having a child gave them something that was theirs and only theirs, at least for some time. Usually the children would not be separated from the mother until they were a little bit older, where it was clear that they had survived, and so forth. Breastfeeding was also an important kind of layer to reproductive rights issues during this, because enslaved women did not have the privilege of being able to breastfeed their children. Most often, if the enslaved woman was had given birth, she was usually giving birth around the same time as the plantation owner's wife, and the plantation owner wives sometimes could not breastfeed, and so that, or even if they could, the task was given to the enslaved woman to breastfeed the white babies. And as a result, the mothers could not breastfeed their own children, and that was completely expected and forced on these women. So I think this is a hugely important book because it tackles that topic of reproductive rights on plantations through the perspective of enslaved women. The next book that I read was Secrets in Death. Was book number 45 in the End Death series. I really liked this one. I thought that the mystery was really solid. This is one of the few where I was able to figure it out. I usually don't even try to figure out like the whodunit in these books because I just enjoyed like the writing and the storytelling. But this one I figured it out, and it didn't take away from the story for me. So if you're not familiar with the In Death series, is a like 55 plus book series now written by Nora Roberts, and it's set in a futuristic New York following a cop who solves crimes. There are a lot of things I'm enjoying about the series. I have some critiques of it. At some point when I catch up in the series, I might do a discussion of that. Next book I finished was Bad Indians, a Tribal Memoir by Deborah A. Miranda. This is a book that I've been wanting to read for a long time. I finally got it from my library, and it was not exactly what I expected. It is a memoir, but it interweaves quite a bit of history about indigenous tribes in California, which is what I expected, but it's also told in a series of essays and poems. She also pulls from like newspaper articles and archives, whatever like material she was able to find. She puts in this in her book, and so as a result it made it a little bit harder to get into it for me. But I think that this type of storytelling is really unique. It really highlighted the author's critique of colonialism and especially the mission system in California. And so I thought that in the end it was successful, and I was not prepared for this kind of storytelling, which is why I'm emphasizing it here. If you pick up this book, you want to be prepared for this type of storytelling. It weaves history and memoir, but does it also in essays / poem / multimedia aspect. But I loved it because of that critique of the mission system and because of the way the author goes through some of the family history and the different storytelling techniques within her indigenous community. So if you're interested in learning more about indigenous communities, especially in California, I think this is a good one to pick up. The next book that I finished was Earth. This is book number 15 in the Rougon-Macquart series by Èmile Zola. I picked this up with my friend, and I actually need to do a dedicated review video for this book because it's part of my Reading the French Classic series. So I will limit what I say here, and if you want to hear more on my thoughts on this book, keep an eye out on my channel. But this it follows a peasant village in rural France, and we just start digging into the lives of peasants. This book was actually banned in England, or at least the English translation was banned in England because it was felt that it was too pornographic. I can see why. There's not pornography in the book, but Zola makes very clear parallels between animal behavior and human behavior in a way that can be very disconcerting. And right in chapter one, you get a sense of what Zola is doing, and that like he just follows up on that. It's brilliantly written. One of the things that Zola was doing with the Rougon-Macquart series was give us the truth as he saw it, and he did a ton of research and investigation on it, but the truth about France in this time period as he saw it. And so this is his version of the truth of peasant life, and it's really harsh. No one in this story comes off looking very good. I do have some critiques of it. I don't think Zola had a good understanding of what sexual assault feels like for a woman. one of the main characters in the story is sexually harassed and assaulted. And the way he writes about it is so wrong. Like, it's clearly this is some sort of weird male idea of what sexual assault feels like. Other than that, and a couple of other critiques, I felt like the book was really, really quite brilliant, and for that, extremely difficult to read towards the end, because you see what's gonna happen, and it's terrible. It's horrific. So I'll leave it at that here, and just again, if you want to hear more about it, watch out for my video. And then the book number 15 that I finished in 2023 is Minor Detail by Adania Shibli. This is a book that I heard Nashwa talk about in her channel. I will link that video down below, where she was doing a recap of her favorite books of 2022. And it sounded really interesting. And it turns out it's a short book. It has really 2 chapters. One told from the perspective of an Israeli soldier at the end of the war, in the creation of Israel, of the state of Israel. And the soldier is part of the rape of a Palestinian woman. You have to know that going in. You need to know that. In the second chapter, it's set in I think in the 90s, and you're following a Muslim woman who lives in partitioned Palestine, and she is trying to investigate that sexual assault that occurred in the past. She has a sense of connection to that story, and she sets out to find out as much as possible about that story. So it's about the kind of apartheid that has existed there since the creation of the state of Israel, and through the eyes of these 2 different stories. And it was so impactful. Not necessarily the first story. The first story I had a little bit of a harder time getting into, but the second story I was fully immersed in. I was with her, the main character, every step of the way, and so just beautifully written, because you're in this main character's head, going through the steps of finding out the story, experiencing some of these things with her. And I just thought that was the way the author immersed me in that story. I thought was magnificent. Obviously horrific things are happening here, so you also need to be prepared to encounter some of that. So content warnings for obviously sexual assault, for violence, for one of the things that the main character in the second story is experiencing a lot is checkpoints, stopping at checkpoints, and the fear every time she encounters an Israeli soldier. And actually I felt like so connected to that, because I'm an immigrant, and I remember what it feels like to go through immigration checkpoints, and just that kind of fear. I don't want to make this about my own personal experience, but I felt like I understood that at a very personal level, the fear that character is going through. So if you have any trauma around those kinds of immigration checkpoints, watch out for that. Take care of yourself. Make sure that you can handle reading that in this book. I did the audiobook for Minor Detail, and I do recommend the audiobook, especially for that second story. It was just so well done. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So those are the next 5 books in my 2023 reading. If you've read any of these, if you think you might be interested in them, when you're in the right mental space to handle some of the material, I'm looking back and I'm like, oh wow, I was reading a lot of heavy topics here, and that is why the in-depth book is in here. The in-depth book, even though it's a thriller, and it always includes murder and violence, it's like watching Law and Order, right? It's like cozy, because you know that the main character is going to solve the mystery in the end, that justice will be done, and so there's a kind of comfort that that provides while reading heavy topics. And so I tend to use the in-depth series that way, and romance novels. I just happen to be more into the in-depth book series at this point than the romance novels. But I probably need to pick up some romance novels next, because I've continued reading some heavy topics since I finished those books. So that is it for me. Those are the next 5 books I read. Let me know what you just finished. What is something that has stood out to you in your 2023 reading so far? Because I'm always looking for new books to add to my TBR. But thank you so much for watching this video. I'll see you in the next one. Bye.